Thank you. I guess it's not going to rain. Not for the next 20 minutes, anyway. It's a great honor to have been asked to play this role here this afternoon. I honor the risk that they took and the risk that I take at the same time. And I very much appreciate Pancho Savory's words, which helped me feel that, well, maybe he's right. I am an appropriate person to talk about these things at this particular point. As we all know, Reed has intellectual and moral and ethical roots, I guess, in Emersonian and Thoreauvian talk back in New England. There's a history there that brings it over to Portland. And at the same time, I would like to argue that there is a West Coast aspect to it all, that the West Coast of the United States, the West Coast of Turtle Island, which is at the eastern edge of the Pacific Ocean, from Sitka, Alaska, all the way down to somewhere near, but not all the way to Los Angeles, has a somewhat unique cultural and political history going back to the early years of the 20th century. I grew up in that. I grew up on an impoverished stump farm north of Seattle in the Depression, with parents who believed in education but didn't have the least idea of what you would do with it, which was not uncommon then or now. And we only had 2 books in the house because it was not a period of affluence. There were 2 things that challenged me as a kid. One was the big stumps that were in back of our cow pasture and up the hill and back. 8 to 12 foot high stumps with 10-foot diameters and springboard notches cut in the sides, with a thick and dense second growth, third growth coming in around them: cascara, vine maple, madrone, and some native wild blackberries, not the current invasive wild blackberries. A world that is, in its own terms, passed on, and that very area, which I have seen in recent years, is now all small housing for workers who originally built their places to work at Boeing. There is nothing but change going on, of course. But we managed to get our books at the University District Branch of the Seattle Public Library. And as for the stumps, it drove me to try to figure out what the forest history and the ecological history of my own region had been. Something I am still working on. But it was a good push. And I think that in a way, part of what got me going in my own direction was the influence of the ghosts of the trees hovering over those stumps, or something like that, up there in the far northwest. But then World War II came along, and my father, who had been a Marine in the Marine Corps in World War I, after many years of unemployment, had employment with the Veterans Administration. And we moved down here to Portland, and I ended up going to Lincoln High School, something that nobody seems to remember anymore, that Lincoln High School was in a building which is now one of the main buildings of Portland University, and not where it is now at all. So that's, again, it's 60 years since I graduated from Reed. I have to remember that. So I managed to get entry into Reed College primarily because of a few poems I had written that were about mountain climbing, and mountaineering was my other youthful passion, mountaineering and skiing. The snow peaks of the Pacific Northwest, first Mount St. Helens, then Mount Hood, then Mount Adams, a little later Glacier Peak and Mount Baker, Rainier finally, and then going back and doing some of them over again. I climbed Mount Hood 13 times. There's no good excuse for that. But I guess that it did indicate that I was the type of person who's fascinated by difficulty and who is not content with being challenged once, but wants to do it again and again. That was perfect for coming to Reed. I got in because of poetry. I was turned down on the basis of my miserable academic work in high school, since I'd spent most of my spare time skiing and climbing. But I also was an employee of the Portland Oregonian, a copy boy, working from the 4 p.m. till midnight shift every day. And so I was a responsible citizen to some degree. I found Reed instantly challenging, strange, inspiring, and, you know, like any kid from Portland or any other small town, Portland was a small town in those days, it was great to find people smarter than me and be up against them, since I had thought for a while that I was the smart guy in the class, you know. Literally have my prose style cleaned up by people who are long forgotten, like Owen Ulf. I'm glad somebody here remembers Owen. Who wrote a great book, you know, called The Leather Throne, which was about his saddle, because what he really liked doing was running his ranch down in Nevada. So Reed set the bar higher for me and lots of people, whacked me a lot. I learned what you would call intellectual swordsmanship, kendo. I learned how to defend myself and also whack others. And that can be very useful too. And it is one of the things that sets Reed people aside, I think, because that's what they do in graduate school. But not for undergraduates. I am a West Coast person, but when I was teaching for over 15 years at the University of California at Davis, I was constantly depressed by the fact that none of the students were willing to argue. They all wanted to be nice. I supported myself when I got out of Reed with work in Forest Service lookouts, Forest Service firefighting, trail crew building, and other seasonal labor in the woods, which was really a nice balance. So now I want to say 100 years is kind of a long time, and I'm sort of in the middle of it. I remember at least the second half of it. When I was a student at Portland 60 years ago, I thought it was old. I already thought it was old. Now I have to think that I'm old, I guess, you know, to balance that out. It's 3 generations, 100 years. It reaches back to 1911, and even then, there were many people, some people and many people, who had some sense of what was coming. There was a spirit of triumphalism and the coming exploitation of the West, but there was also a sense in some other thinkers, writers, and business people and political people too, that what was happening was not going to be nice, which more or less turns out to be right. You can go back to the Chesapeake Bay on the East Coast in the 17th century and see some writings that said the remarkable wealth of fisheries and bird life in Chesapeake Bay will soon be destroyed. There have always been a few voices in North America, in the United States, that had that non-triumphalist, that alternative perspective of what was going to be lost. And the accomplishments of early, middle, and late capitalism are extraordinary, as Marx himself said. But the other side of it is that the environment, that the fabric of the natural world has been hit hard. And I took that early on to heart myself. And then, 100 years is not a very long time on this old continent. The Columbia River and the Willamette River will be around for tens of thousands of years, with minor modifications as to where they go and when they come. If whatever else happens, this creek back here, the Crystal Springs Creek, which I wrote a paper on in my freshman year, and analyzed, what the hundreds of gallons of flow per minute there, coming out of the side of the hill, and then going down through the golf course and off through Westmoreland Park, joined by Johnson Creek, and going into the Willamette River. That's going to be here. Whether the future is more suburbs and more, high-rises or whatever it's going to be, or if it's going to be burned out shells of houses and trees coming back. They'll still be here. It'll still be running. Watersheds are very hard to change, and they have a perennial life of their own. So that is, looking at another side of it, which is inspiring too in its own way. The human question is how to be in this ongoing rush of change. As if economic and political woes weren't enough, we have to remember that we also have earthquakes, eruptions, tornadoes, warming climates to look at. And at the same time, maintain, they've got a lot of airplanes over here, maintain our own confidence in the mind and in language. The two wonderful complexities of consciousness that have every sign of being part of our species' own abilities, and that are ultimately more complex, richer, and underlying everything digital, everything computer generated. Language itself, the natural language, as we learn it and speak it, as we grow into it, is the most complex intellectual achievement of our lives, we are told by neurological linguists and such. That you will never make as many neural connections in your entire life as you make in the first 6 or 7 years of your life when you are mastering language without teachers. Teachers come later. Teachers are only there, language teachers are there to help one understand what the codes of society are in regard to the use of language, but not for language itself. So this kind of thinking was the beginning of what came to me from the other intellectual influence of Reid, the lesser appreciated influence, which was anthropology. And human powers are probably not unique in the world of sentient beings, but as far as we know, we might as well leave it at that. The humanities, which is perhaps misnamed, the term comes from determining that there was an alternative intellectual life to that of the church, and it is set against proper theological studies historically. So the term is humanistic scholarship, really. Going back to some of the first libraries, it is said that the first private library was that of Aristotle. And the history goes on from there. The humanities is not about human beings. It's not about the human spirit. It's not about what it is that makes us human. It's about what is the story that we can tell ourselves, that has been told about us. What excited me about the humanities courses degree, those 2 years that I went through, and that I guess we all go through, was sensing where the boundaries were and where it should go from there. Indigenous cultures, East Asian cultures, the cultures of the world, and then prehistory. Why stop at history? Go back. Why limit history to the idea of written texts? Writing is a very new invention. Homo sapiens is about 70,000 years old, and possibly older. I have argued that, and this is justified in part by the size of the brain pans of Cro-Magnon, that human beings were as smart or smarter 70,000 years ago than they are now. They had larger brains. What do you think of that? So that has been part of the expansion that I've tried to bring to my own thinking, except it's just too big. No, you can't make a curriculum around all that. Which is to say then, your education just doesn't end when you leave college, which we all know. However, if you don't, if you're not willing to accept some literal version of the world from one of the religions of the book, then that means you have to go after history. And history is contentious, contestable. This is what postmodernism has been all about, questioning, what are a variety of received truths, and what are the forces that generated them, the class interests and so forth. But still, it has to be pursued. The people who have pursued the study of history more relentlessly and with a greater consciousness of why they have to do it than anybody else on earth has been the Chinese. There were more books in print in the year 1800, they say, in the Chinese language than all the other books of the world. And this is why the Chinese are so upset. The Chinese elite is so obsessed with the centrality of their culture, which neglects the fact that 85% of the Chinese were never literate anyway, and that the rest of Chinese culture had an oral tradition, a folk tradition of agriculture and literature that was perfectly workable in its own way. So that's another dimension of that. The Reed education provides a way of looking for the bottom line that underlies all trivial and provisional, usual notions of bottom line, and has the virtue of being both detached, education for its own sake, and remarkably useful at the same time. Useful as to knowing who we are, expanding that to include not just any one racial or ethnic line, what the limits and connections are, useful for that detachment as well. So, then, as Buddhist teachings say, once you've crossed the river, don't try to keep on carrying the raft along with you. I'm making a move into some Buddhist thought right now. When I managed finally to get out of the United States and take up an offer that came to me to be a student in Japan, 1956. I entered into traditional Zen training that has always had the phrase, the little phrase, no dependence on words and letters, a special transmission, mind to mind. And like many other people, I thought, oh, they're rejecting learning at that time. It took me some years of being around Zen priests and Zen monks and Zen students to realize that isn't what they meant at all. They meant that everybody is so darned educated already. And throughout East Asian history, it meant that people who have finished their exhaustive studies of the Chinese classics, secular history, Buddhist philosophy, and poetry should now set it aside at that point and want to touch base with the mind ground. Going through some of that training taught me to really appreciate education and also to get to know better its limits and the practice, finally, of simply being fully present every moment. So I left Reed behind like that raft that you might leave behind when I went to graduate school and then 10 years of residence in Buddhist Kyoto, and came back to the West Coast in 1969 and found then that my vocation had changed in a way, or had clearly become poetry, writing, and teaching, even while based in the rural backcountry, or because of it, where I could carry it forward. So I'll mention several old friends that started me on this path. G.I. Bill veterans, Philip Whalen, now departed, wonderful poet. Another Reed person, David Snyder, who is a Vajrayana Buddhist priest and teacher now in Cologne, Germany, has written his biography. Finished it, actually, and it will be coming out from the University of California Press. Charles Leong, as I said, who taught me Chinese calligraphy, started me on Chinese calligraphy, and made me read Confucius, Master Kung, and made me aware of the idea of etiquette and manners, which I really learned when I finally got to Japan. People ask me sometimes, what did you learn in Japan? And I say, that I should dress better. That was one of several useful lessons. Anybody that's traveled in the rest of the world is aware of that, of course. Americans are the most casual people on earth right now. Bill Baker, who's here today, who came back, a G.I. Bill guy, from the infantry, and his interest in Elizabethan poetry, and a remarkable dedication to just that through the years. And Lou Welch, who was, in our own time, we considered him the most talented, the golden boy. The talent of poetry that we aspired to. Philip and I felt that about Lou, and so did others. And he committed suicide and disappeared 40 years ago. And just recently in Los Angeles, at the Los Angeles Public Library, held a celebration of the 40th anniversary of Lou's disappearance. Just last week, I was down there for it. He disappeared on May 23rd, 1971. These things go on. So I'm going to read a poem of Lou's, of mine, for Lou. From Lou. A kind of vision that came to me from being overheated by the heat of a sauna at my place. Lou Welsh just turned up one day, as live as you and me. "Damn, Lou," I said. "You didn't shoot yourself after all." "Yes, I did," he said. And even then I felt the tingling down my back. "Yes, you did too," I said. "I can feel it now." "Yeah," he said. "There's a basic fear between your world and mine. I don't know why. What I came to say was, teach the children about the cycles, the life cycles, all the other cycles. That's what it's all about, and it's all forgot." I wondered what that meant. Later I ran on to literature on the oxygen cycle, the carbon cycle, and the water cycle, and I realized that's what it was about. The water cycle is, for example, among other things, that every molecule of water on Earth except those molecules locked up in Arctic or Antarctic ice is out of the ocean and back into the ocean once every 2 million years. And finally, and to finish with this, a letter to M.A., who lives far away, a young woman of 13 who wrote me a letter all in rhyme asking about how to write poetry. "Dear Melissa, I do remember you. You had curly hair and stood by the stair up there on Quadra Isle with a shy smile. Say hello to your mother, Jean. I don't remember your sister's name, and that's a shame. But I sort of remember her face and natural grace. Not all poetry has to rhyme, but this time I'm writing back the way you did it. It's to your credit. You got me to write this form, since real poetry is born from a formless place, which is our original face, Buddhist teachers say in play. So if this helps you be a writer, it will please your new friend, Gary Snyder.